Welcome back to GLBC Connections. On this Friday, we're going to finish off the end of Mark 6 today. As we do that, I was reminded of a time when I was working retail in Toledo. I was working my way through college at the time. I had a gentleman stop in, and he had a little problem, and I didn't have much to do, as was often the case. The business was slow that day, and so as I worked on his issue, and charged him and things like that. It was a little time consuming. And so we just struck up a conversation, as I often did. I asked him, what he did and things like that. And he told me he was an engineer and who he'd worked for. And, my dad was an engineer in Toledo. And so after the transaction was over, he left the store. And later on that week, I was talking with my dad and I said, hey, I met this guy the other day. He was an engineer for a large corporation in Toledo. Did you happen to know him? And my dad laughed and he said, yeah. It turned out the guy was a CEO of one of the largest corporations in Toledo. He was retired at the time, but he was really one of the most well-known guys in Toledo, and actually in the automotive industry, well known throughout the nation and the world, and for a short period of time was the dean of the Stanford Business School, a very prestigious position. It turned out he was a really important person. I didn't realize that when I was talking to him. I kind of chuckled to myself and I thought, I should have spent a little more time talking with him. Maybe I could have finagled a job or something out of it. Anyway, he was a really nice guy and I appreciated the chance to get to know him. The reason I bring that up is as we go to Mark 6, this is a common problem that the disciples are wrestling with and the people in Israel. Jesus is moving through Israel doing his work, but people still don't quite grasp who he is. And so Jesus is trying to make the point over and over, and Mark is trying to tell us who he is. And he does it in Mark 6 in a really powerful way. And I want us to see, this is actually, I think, my favorite story in all of the Gospels. Not because it's such a terrific story, it is a terrific story, but because of how it teaches. And I want you to see it. It's Mark chapter 6. We're just going to look at the story where Jesus walks on the water, starting in verse 45. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. Well, I want us to see what this story really teaches. The first one is I want you to notice that Jesus is on the land and he has plans to move across the lake, but he sends the disciples ahead. This is a really important part of the story. Jesus sends the disciples into a dangerous situation. He sends them across the lake and into a storm. And into that storm, he sees them straining against the oars. The wind comes up. It's a serious storm, and storms on the Sea of Galilee actually could be serious. The Sea of Galilee exists kind of in a bowl with a little funnel that leads into it, and the storms do get quite serious. And they come up all of a sudden and out of the blue. So the disciples find themselves in that situation. And Mark says, seeing that problem, Jesus decides to do something about it. And so he goes down and he walks on the water. And the first thing I want you to notice about this is that Jesus walks on the water. I know that's a good miracle, right? But it's bigger than that. If you go back to the Old Testament and see who really can do that, that is a miracle. Controlling the water, controlling the sea is a miracle that is only for God. That's his domain alone. No man can do that. And then the second thing I want you to see is that it says Jesus goes to pass by them. That is a strange phrase, isn't it? So here we have the disciples in trouble, and Jesus walks out, and Mark says he goes to pass by. Why pass by? Is he going to wave? Hey, good luck, everybody, with your rowing against the wind. I hope you make it. As it happens, I get to walk across the water, so I'll see you over there. Why is that language there? Why pass by? Well, like walking on the water points only to God, passing by is language that refers only to God. Back in the Old Testament, when Moses asks to see the Lord's face, Exodus says, the Lord passed by Moses. And again, Elijah in 1 Kings, I think it was 1 Kings, when he wants to see the face of the Lord sticks him in the cleft of the rock. And what does it say? The Lord passed by. Passing by is language that refers to God. And Mark uses it very specifically here. Just as God passed by Moses and God passed by Elijah, he is passing by the disciples. They don't recognize who he is yet, but Mark wants us to see it. It is God who walks on water. It is God who passes by. And then Jesus calms the storm. And who does that? Once again, that's a miracle that is reserved only for God himself. And so 3 times in this we see Jesus is being shown to be what he is and who he is. Not just a great man, not just a great teacher, but God himself. He walks on water, something only God can do. He passes by. That is God language. And he calms a storm. Something, again, only God can do. Mark is not trying to talk to us about working ourselves through the storms of life. He's not trying to help us see that Jesus can do miracles when we're in the storms of life. Mark is trying to help us see something far more powerful than that Jesus is God himself, and he is worthy of worship. That has direct application for us, just like it did the disciples. If in fact we follow Jesus, and if in fact we worship him, what we're really saying to him is, you get control of our lives. But here in Mark, we realize that is not nearly so scary as it sounds. We like to keep control of our own lives, don't we? We like to have control. But really when we worship Jesus, we give control over to him. But here we see in Mark, he is worthy of that control. He's powerful enough to handle anything that comes our way. He is God. He walks on water. He passes by. He calms storms. He is worthy of worship. I want to challenge you today to think about giving all of your life to Jesus Christ, every last part of it. The parts that we hold in reserve, sometimes we hold on to so tightly. But really, Jesus wants all of it. He wants control of all of it. He is worthy of worship. He is God himself. That's the lesson of Mark 6. Not that he calms our storms, not that he just makes everything right in our little situation. Just simply this, that he is worthy of worship and worthy of following. He is much more than we expect and much more than we realize. He was much more for the disciples. He is much more for us. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoy this little section of Mark as much as I do. It's a terrific story with lots of depth to it. Thanks.